wonderful joy this morning to be together, to be able to sing these songs. It's something that's easy to take for granted, and we need to fight against that tendency. What a joy to be here this morning. I want to join with Mark in welcoming everyone who is here and those who are joining at home. We're glad that you're here, and those who are unable to be with us due to physical circumstances, we're glad that you're able to connect in this way and you're not forgotten. So we're continuing in our series on the book of James. Got ahead of myself here. There we go. We're continuing our series in the book of James, and we have, after today, 2 more lessons, and that series will be concluded. I hope that you've enjoyed it and you found it beneficial and encouraging. To give you a little bit of a heads up, the plan is immediately following that series to launch into another, to do 8 parts on the book of Revelation, which I saw a survey a while back that if the number one requested sermon series of churches is on the book of Revelation, and the least desirous of preachers to preach is a series on the book of Revelation. So Jarrett and I are putting you before ourselves. It seemed to us to be the right time to do that. We are, in case you haven't heard, in an election season. And a lot of people are concerned and worried in one direction or another. And we felt that it's a vital time for us to fix our eyes on Jesus, to see revealed to us the permanent things that we have confidence in and that we can take our stand on and be secure in. And so we want to keep our eyes on Jesus during the next several weeks and months. Well, do you remember the year 2020? Can you believe that it'll soon be half a decade before when 2020 and COVID hit? I remember thinking back on that this week, and how many businesses, organizations, and even churches were taking advantage of the year 2020 to do a play on words, or really a play on numbers, and coming up with catchy phrases like, our vision is 2020 for 2020. You know, we can see into the head, we've got great plans, and we know what's going to happen, and we're going to capitalize on it, we're going to make the most of it. And I saw this, looked back and found this. I should have clipped the actual heading, but I just wrote it down. It was an article in online Forbes magazine that was titled thus, 2020 Vision in 2020, Bold Goals for a New Decade by Lisa Kent. It was a pretty good article. I went ahead and read the article. But Lisa, like you and me and everyone else who thought they had 2020 vision going into 2020, soon got the memo by March that you don't know what the future holds. None of us do. And in today's section, James confronts us with this truth. And he reminds us of both the uncertainty of the future and the brevity of our lives. And he especially connects these things with how we use our wealth. And so I'm calling today's lesson Time and Money. Time and money. I think James wants to challenge our presuppositions about both of these things. So in James chapter 4 and in verse 13, James begins the section by saying, now come on, I want you to lean in and listen up. Lean in and listen up. Now listen, you who say, especially if you've ever been a person who has used language like this. Today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city. We'll spend a year there and carry on business and make money. James has a special message for any of us who have said these kinds of words before, which probably is most of us. And I want to answer in the first half of this lesson, well, what is the problem that James sees with this statement? And then consider, why is it a problem? And then look at what James offers as a solution to the problem. First, what is the problem? I don't think the problem that James is addressing here is just the problem of planning ahead. As we've noticed throughout this series, the book of James is rooted in what we could call the Hebrew wisdom tradition, going back to the book of Proverbs, which reminds us repeatedly of the importance of looking ahead, looking into the future, and preparing for what is to come. And while Jesus encourages us not to worry about tomorrow, not even to worry about what we're going to eat or what we're going to wear, but he doesn't mean by that therefore, since you shouldn't worry about tomorrow and what you're going to eat, that you don't need to go to the grocery store and make out a meal plan for the week. We're not to obsessively worry about the future as if there was not a heavenly Father who cared for us and was taking care of us. But that does not negate the importance of us thinking about the future and making appropriate plans. But what James, I think, is condemning here, or warning us about, or calling our attention to, is the attitude of presumption and arrogance that so often goes into our plans for the future. In verse 16, he'll put it this way. He says, "As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. And all such boasting," he says, "is evil." So boasting is something that we do when we are talking about the future, about who we are, what we're going to do, how it's going to go down. And it assumes two things. Number one, it assumes that I know how the future should unfold. I know what's best for tomorrow, and not only do I know what's best for tomorrow, I have the wherewithal to make it happen. I have a vision, a 2020 vision for the future, and I've got the muscle, I've got the money, I've got the will, whatever it is that's necessary in order to cause my vision for the future to unfold exactly according to my plan. And he says that's boasting, and it's arrogant. It reminds me of Goliath. You know, there are so many battles in the Old Testament, and almost every one of them begins with both sides making a boast. And that's just what people do. People still do that. The leader of North Korea made the boast that he was going to make a pudding of the bones of Americans. And I mean, it's ridiculous because everybody knows that bones are crunchy, and who wants a crunchy pudding, you know? To quote Get Smart. So you end up making a fool of yourself when you make these boasts about the future that you don't even know what's going to happen. And in the Old Testament, we see all of these boasts about battle. And one of my favorite lines comes from Israel's worst king, who in response to a boast of his opponent king prior to a battle, he just said, "Let not him who puts on his armor boast like him who's taking it off." Make your boast after the fact, not before the fact. And you remember the boast of Goliath before he met David on the field of battle. He looked at David and he said, "I'm going to feed your flesh to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth." He boasted presumptuously about a future that he did not see accurately. And we boast in order to pump ourselves up. That's why people do this before they go to war. That's why boxers or fighters do this before they go into the arena or the cage or whatever it is. We make these boasts, and we're doing it actually not out of true confidence, but because it's something that we need because of our lack of confidence to boost ourselves, to build ourselves up. And so we should ask ourselves this morning, what is it that we are boasting about? What are we trying to pump ourselves up about? What are we taking arrogant pride in to try to convince ourselves that we're going to be able to make the future happen the way we think it should happen? Are we relying upon our intelligence? I'm smart. I've done my due diligence. I've made the best research and strategic planning, and I know what's going to happen. I'm confident. Or maybe it's just our strength. I have the power to impose my will and to control my destiny. Or maybe I'm just rich. I've got the resources that are necessary no matter what happens. I can cover all the bases, and I know what's going to happen in my future. And so in the song that Derek just led us in, taken from Jeremiah 9:23 and 24, we need to be hearing these words. Thus says the Lord, let not the wise man boast in his wisdom. Let not the mighty man boast in his might. Let not the rich man boast in his riches, but let him who boasts boast in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord who practices steadfast love, justice, and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I delight, declares the Lord. And so the problem is not planning ahead. The problem is planning ahead with an attitude of presumptive arrogance, that we know exactly what's going to happen or that we in our own strength can make it happen. Well, why is this such a problem? James gives us two reasons. First, in the first statement in verse 14, where he says, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. How can you boast about what you're going to do in the year to come or the decade to come when you don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow? James is addressing the fact that human beings have a knack for vastly overestimating their predictive abilities. And that's true, I think, for pretty much all of us. In fact, psychologists and psychiatrists or people who study the way people think, whatever you call those folks, even have names for this. There's all kinds of lists of what they call cognitive biases. And this one is simply called a hindsight bias. And it actually works to make us think that we're better at predicting the future than we really are. And it's called hindsight bias because whenever something happens, we fool ourselves into thinking that we knew that was going to happen all along. We remember the fact that we called it about what was going to happen in the game just before it happened. And we remember the time that we called it and got it right. We forget conveniently about the 9 times that we called it and it went the other way. And as a result of having thought that we actually knew what was going to happen before it happened, we then look into the future thinking that I'm pretty good at this. I'm pretty good at predicting it. But objective tests reveal over and over again that human beings, again, have a knack for vastly overestimating their ability to predict the future. No matter how meticulous or insightful you are, the truth remains, you don't know. You don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. And the amazing thing is that the more technologically advanced we become, the more we tend to become overconfident about our abilities. And it shows itself. I love the story of the Titanic because it illustrates this principle of man's boldness about predicting the future and confidence in what he is able to do. The Titanic was the greatest ship that had ever been built, and at its launch on the maiden voyage, there was someone who had worked on the ship that was standing there and was reported to have said, "This is the ship that God himself could not sink." And I wonder how many people on board that ship as it steamed from England to New York City were talking to each other and boasting arrogantly of their plans of, we're going to go to New York, and there we're going to spend a year, and we're going to do business, and we're going to make money. And they and their plans slipped into the icy waters of the Atlantic to be heard of no more. Which leads us to James' second reason why boastful planning is really delusional. In the second half of the verse, he says, what is your life? What is your life? James is really good at asking just the right question. Jarrett pointed out last week, at the end of his lesson, that James asks, who are you? And he asks that question in terms of who are you to judge your brother or sister? If we know who we are, we won't make the wrong kinds of judgments about each other. We'll know who the judge is and who I am. And here, if you know what you are, you won't make the mistake of presuming too much about your future. Because James says, here's what you are. Here's what your life is. You are a mist, a vapor. that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. I love the way Mark Hall puts this in the lyrics to his song, I Am Yours. He says, I am a flower quickly fading, here today and gone tomorrow, a wave tossed in the ocean, a vapor in the wind. And that's a crushing reality to us unless the I am, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, the eternal one, knows your name and holds you in the palm of his hand and says to you that though you may die, yet shall you live in him. We need to anchor our future in the one place that it's real, that it is secure. And we tend to think that that's in the here and the now. And we feel like I'm tough, I'm strong, I'm substantial, I've got it together. But we're a mist, we're a vapor, and we're fading quickly away. But he is the eternal one. And only in our relationship with him and by rooting our life in him and in living according to his kingdom and his principles can we have a reliable confidence in a solid future. And so what's the solution to the problem? The problem's not planning, but arrogant planning. And if the problem is being delusional by thinking we know what's going to happen tomorrow and forgetting that we are but a vapor that appears for a little while, then what's the solution? Again, two things James gives us. First, in verse 15, where he says, instead of making your boast about what you're going to do, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will do this or that. So the first thing is to recognize that there are forces at work that are greater than you. And above them all is the will of God Almighty. And to always recognize that our plans are subject to his plans. And then secondly, he says in verse 17, and before we do that, let me go back and say that I think we ought to verbalize that. We're not only to recognize that occasionally mentally, but sometimes we need to verbalize that in our plans, that we ought to say, if it is the Lord's will. Now, I don't mean that you need to just wear everybody out by every moment, every time you say anything about the future that you have to add that phrase. But I do think it's interesting, and I'd never noticed this before this week, that in Paul's letters, he uses that phrase 5 times. 5 times Paul does say to the people that he's writing to, if it's the Lord's will, I'm going to do this or that. And so maybe it was a common practice among the apostles and leaders and Christians in the early church to recognize the brevity of life, the uncertainty of the future, and to remember by verbally expressing, if it's the Lord's will, we're going to do this. Maybe we need to reintroduce that to our vocabulary. But then secondly, in verse 17, he brings this to, I think, its high point. This is the bottom line of this closing of this section. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and does not do it, it is sin for them. Don't defer the good that you can do today till the second half. Take the opportunity to do whatever good God enables you to do and do it now in view of the fact that you don't know what tomorrow holds and you don't know if you're going to be here in it anyway. Don't let the opportunity to do good pass you by. Build God's kingdom first in your life and let him take care of the rest. I'm sure this morning that there's someone here right now who knows that it's good to seek the heart of God, to come to know him as he's revealed to us in his word and in his son Jesus, and to pursue him passionately and diligently in faith and in prayer, and to do and know his will. That's a good thing to do. Well, when's the time to do that? Now. Do it today. I'm sure there's a dad here who realizes it's a good thing to spend some time with my teenage son or daughter. And today is the day that's a good time to do that. It was when my children became teenagers that I first really began to get a sense of just how quickly time is passing by. And your 14, 15, 16-year-old son or daughter that just seems like they've been a fixture in your house, it just seems like pretty much your whole life at this point, are before you can bat an eye going to be gone. And so take advantage today to build the relationship that you need to with your children. There's a husband or a wife here today who knows that it would be a good and right thing to make an apology to your spouse about something you've said or done or left undone. And today is the day to do that, to do the good. Don't leave it undone. That in itself is to compound the error. There's someone here today who has money in their pocket, the resources to do some good for someone who is in need, and today is the day to make it happen. You know someone who is far from God and is hopeless in their situation, and you have Christ in your heart and in your mouth. Today is the day to build that relationship with them that hopefully could lead them into a saving and transforming relationship with Jesus. Today. Most of us spend our lives thinking that the next season of our life is when life really begins. And right now we're just in a preparation, and yet we do that all the way through our life. And we think as we go along that we'll start serving, start loving, start giving, start seeking God's kingdom first as soon as I finish this other thing first. But you don't know what's up ahead, and you forget that your life is so quickly passing you by. And while this is true about everything in life, James connects it especially to money. And he warns us in this passage and in the passage to follow that those of us who have some wealth to remember that the wealth and power that God has given us is not so that we can abuse the poor and the weak, but so that we can bless the poor and the weak. And that the good that we can do today through our financial means is something that James wants us to take advantage of right now. Not delay, not put it off. And that's why in chapter 5, verses 1 through 5, he says this. Now listen, same way he began the previous section. That's why I think all of this is connected. Now listen, lean in, listen up, you rich people. I forget exactly the figure, but around $33,000. If your household income is above $33,000, you're in the richest 1% of people in the world. So maybe this is further reaching than most of us would like to admit. But now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes, and your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the heavens, the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fatted yourselves in the day of slaughter. Some have suggested that this is an expression that James is making not to his Christian audience, but to the unbelieving Jewish people who have been persecuting them in view of the coming destruction of Jerusalem and Judea just a couple of decades after this was written. And that may be part of the case, but I think he's still speaking to his audience, and he's simply reminding them and all of us of the danger that we have of misusing our resources to harm those and to suppress or oppress those who are beneath us rather than to use them to be a blessing to people. And if we do that, he is warning us in the strongest of language that our money is going to rise up and testify against us in the day of judgment. Think about that. James is calling us to imagine ourselves standing before the judge on the last day. And I'd like to ask you to do that. In your mind's eye, just a moment, I know we're getting down toward the end of the sermon and it's getting hard to hang in there, but just give me this. In your mind's eye, close your eyes if it helps you. See yourself standing before the Lord in judgment. And see at your right hand your bank account, your spending, your budget. And recognize as you stand there that bank account, that money that you've accumulated and the way that you've used it is testifying as you stand before the judge, testifying either for you or against you. That's what James wants us to see. Will it condemn me as a self-indulgent bully who used blessings to run over other people? Or will it vindicate me as one who used what God had put in my hands to help other people and lift them up? And so James finishes with a reminder to the rich and powerful who are tempted to use their positions to crush the poor of this very fact in verse 6. And I think the NIV does translate it best. He says, "You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you." Now that can be taken generically. The innocent poor person who had no resources to respond and was doing you no harm, but you condemned and crushed them instead of blessing them. But I think beyond that, he is speaking of a particular innocent one, a particular righteous one. And he wants us to realize that judge that we just imagined that we're going to stand before, the Lord Jesus, the one who will judge us about how we use these resources that are testifying for or against us, found himself in a position of a resourceless, poor peasant, standing, at least it seemed, before kings and princes and priests and rulers, the wealthy and the powerful. And they condemned the innocent one who was not opposing them, who did not open his mouth in his own defense. And that's going to be the one who we stand before. And so I wonder if we think about all of this, if James had the story that Jesus told in mind that I want to close with this morning. In Luke chapter 12, when Jesus said, "Watch out, be on guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." If we could just get that through our heads, we'd be well down the road. And so he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. I mean, he went and to this or that city and he carried on business and he made a pile of money. And so he had a problem. What shall I do? I have no place to store all my crops, all the stuff that I've accumulated. I don't have the place to put it all. I got an idea. This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I'll store all my surplus. All that I've accumulated, I'll now have a place to pile it up higher and higher. And I'll say to myself, "Self, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. I can see the future. And it looks great. I can just see me relaxing and enjoying the abundance of possessions that I've accumulated. I'm going to take it easy and eat and drink and have a good time." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?" And then Jesus says, "This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." Both James and Jesus are trying to tell us something that's really hard for us to get through our thick skulls. Something that is actually the very opposite of the way we actually think about it. They're trying to tell us that time is short. And money, It's everywhere. It's abundant. There's stuff, the resources in this earth are abundant. And you have everything that you need, but what you don't have a lot of is time. You don't have very much time to do the good in your life that needs to be done. And so most of us worry about running out of money before we run out of time. But James is telling us it ought to be the other way around. You don't want to stand before the judge in the last day and say to him, Lord, look at this pile of stuff I accumulated to give to you. He doesn't need it. He doesn't want it. He wants you to use the time that you have to take whatever resources you have, money, your energy, whatever you've got, whatever gift he's put in your hand, to use that to serve others in this world. And he'll take that as if it was given to him. And then your money that you've given in service to others will testify on your behalf in the day of judgment. And you, like the 5-talent and 2-talent man, will be excited to give an account to the Lord, saying, look at what I've done with what you have given to me. This morning, if you're not a Christian, we want to extend to you the opportunity to come to Christ, the righteous one who did give his life for us, who did not offer a defense on his behalf, but willingly laid down his life for your life. He was rich, and yet he became poor for your sake. And if you want to respond to him and give your life to him and serve him by loving others with the resources he's pouring into your life, then we encourage you to begin that journey this morning. Come confess his name and be united with him in baptism and begin to live that life that he's calling us to walk the journey to the place